Well, so good to have all of you with us today. My name is Chris, and we're in the second part of this series, Walk the Line. And there's nothing like a great revenge story, is there? I mean, there's just something within us. We love a great revenge story. In fact, some of the best action movies are all based off of, well, revenge. I mean, you got a movie franchises like The Equalizer with Denzel Washington, or John Wick with Keanu Reeves, or My Wife's Heartthrob, Liam Neeson. I mean, I tell you, the first Taken movie was actually okay, but every movie after that, not so good. And my wife has this habit of saying, hey, you want to watch a movie? And I'll ask her, well, what movie is it? She'll tell me the title. I'm like, I haven't heard that. And then I'll ask the question, who's in it? And she'll say, Liam Neeson. And I'm like, oh, great. And then I will literally look at her and I'm like, so it's basically Taken part 822, right? Because they're all the same. Now, there's another revenge movie that maybe you wouldn't classify as revenge. There's another revenge movie that, doesn't have all the violence, it doesn't have all the guns and the fighting and throwing people through doors. There's another revenge movie that, on the surface, looks, well, really childlike. But I think at the core part of the story, it really is a revenge movie. You want to know what it is? It's Cinderella. Have you ever thought about that? I mean, I know it's a Disney movie with a Disney princess, but the core part of the story is Cinderella, who, is being mistreated by her stepmom and her stepsisters, and then one day she just happens to lose her slipper, her sandal, her shoe, whatever it was. Just happened to lose it by accident. And Prince Charming just happens to find it. And they fall in love. And she moves into the castle with Prince Charming. And the whole time she's like, ha, 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 I've gotten my revenge. You see, there's nothing like a revenge story. You love that revenge story. I love that revenge story. But the revenge isn't the beginning of the story, is it? I mean, the revenge is the action. What always gets tethered to the very beginning of the story is the grudge. Someone hurts someone else. Someone offends someone else. Someone breaks trust of someone else. Someone attacks someone else. Someone wrongs someone else, right? The grudge starts. And once the grudge is there, now you start to plot your revenge, right? Every great action movie, is where it starts. There's a grudge, and then all of a sudden, how am I going to get that person back? And there's something within all of us. Not only do we like to watch those movies, and not only do we like to read those stories in our own personal lives. You and I, we love a good grudge, don't we? And more than that, we love plotting our revenge to get back, to pay that person back. But here's the thing with a grudge. It's just true. You see, if we hold on to a grudge, we can't hold on to anything else. You see, that grudge takes up all of our space. That grudge takes all of our emotional space, our mental space. I mean, think about how many of those shower conversations you've had, plotting your revenge because of what that person has done to you. How many times you find yourself driving in your car all by yourself, and your mind, it is scripting a revenge storyline like no other. And you might be thinking to yourself right now, well, I don't know if I actually have a grudge. Well, you could change that word. Don't get lost in that specific word. Maybe you're holding on to, literally revenge. Maybe you're holding on to, bitterness. Maybe you're holding on to hurt. Maybe you're holding on to unforgiveness. You see, you could slide another word here, but the reality is still the reality. When you're holding on to it, it consumes all of you. And if we're not intentional, and I mean intentional, it will dominate and infect every relationship that you have. We had a container of strawberries one time, and they were beautiful red strawberries. I mean, just gorgeous, right? Like bright red strawberries. We put them into the fridge, and they were only in there a few days. It wasn't a real long time. And then one day I opened up our refrigerator to get some of the strawberries, and all of a sudden I looked, and well, almost the entire container had turned black and fuzzy and moldy. It was astonishing how quickly. So I opened the lid and I started pulling out the good ones. And what I realized, in the very back corner of the container, there was one really, really dark black strawberry. That one infected the entire container. I mean, I might have saved 2 or 3 or maybe 4. One strawberry or one bad strawberry infected all of them. You see, and this is what happens when we have one grudge, one relationship filled with bitterness, one relationship that has hurt us deeply, one relationship that has unforgiveness. That one relationship impacts. It's like a virus. All of our relationships. And that's why this question that is going to guide us throughout this series is so important. How do we walk with, everyone without being walked over? You see, it's the walking with. And you can't walk with if you have a grudge. You can't walk with if you're plotting revenge. You can't walk with if you're filled with bitterness. You can't walk with you can't. So how do we walk with? How do we walk with without being walked over? Well, Jesus one day was doing a whole day of teaching, and as Jesus did, he would teach different thoughts, different ideas, different truths, and they would start to connect together. And so as he's teaching through that day, Peter, one of his disciples, one of his hand-picked leaders, walked up to Jesus, and he's like, hey, Jesus, I have a question for you. And what I love about Peter is, this is Peter's MO. Like, he was the guy to be, the first to ask the question. Peter was the guy out of the 12 disciples. And you could almost tell the other 11 disciples were like, hey, yeah, Peter, you go first. You risk. You stick out your neck. You ask the question. If it's a dumb question, good luck. And Peter just seemed to always be the first. So Peter walks up to Jesus like, I got a question for you. And this was the question. He is, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? This is a question that we've all asked. I mean, this is a question that every human being across the span of time, thousands of years, like, this is the question. How many times must I forgive someone? How many times when someone has hurt me? How many times when someone's wronged me? How many times when someone's broken trust with me? How many times? I want to know the number. I want to know what the limit is. I want to know where the bar is. I want to know where I can actually come to a point to say, okay, that's enough. But then Peter says something very direct. And, if we go back 2,000 years, it was something that everyone around him understood. But 2,000 years later, it's easy to miss what he was really saying. You see, he adds on to this question. He says, up to 7 times. You see, Peter was raised as, a Jewish boy believing in, Judaism. I mean, that was his faith structure. That was his religious belief. And you see, for all people, we kind of understand when it comes to forgiveness that there is a number, right? And across the span of time, usually that number gets started at 1. Hey, I'll give you 1 chance. If you do that to me again, I'm done. If you break that trust again, I'm done. If you cheat on me again, I'm done. I'll give you 1. right? Across the span of time, it's kind of that one strike, you're out rule. But in the Jewish faith, and Peter, again, being a Jewish boy growing up in a Jewish house, being taught by the rabbis a Jewish Old Testament text, that we call it, or the Jewish ancient text that we call the Old Testament, he would have been taught by a rabbi, and the rabbis taught that you would forgive someone up to 3 times. That's what was taught. Hey, 3 times you should forgive someone. And by the 4th time, you're done. That's the limit. That's the number. That's all you have to do. It's kind of our modern day 3 strikes, you're out type of forgiveness rule structure. So when Peter says to Jesus, up to 7 times, I mean, you got to feel what Peter's doing. Like, Peter's kind of puffing up his chest a little bit. He's been listening to Jesus. He's been learning from Jesus. He knew that Jesus always kind of raised the bar of expectation. So Peter, walking up to Jesus, like, hey, is it 7? Is that the number? Right? And that's a pretty impressive number, especially in a pagan world that says, I'll give you 1 chance, and a Jewish religious world that says you got 3. I mean, Peter more than doubles it and says, hey, what about 7? Oh, that's a good number. You can almost sense that Peter kind of looked around to the other disciples, that had kind of allowed him to be the first one to ask the question that everyone was wanting to know the answer to. And I think Peter kind of like smiled and was like, I think I got this right. I think I got the right number, right? It's not 1. It's not even 3. I mean, 7. That's a good number. And then Jesus looks at Peter. I think he looked around to everyone around him and said something that was staggering. He said something that I think all of them, it just caused them to, sit in deafening silence. It was something that, their jaws would have dropped. Jesus said, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. And here's what they all understood. Here's what they all grasped. When he said 77 times, or maybe you've heard it said 7 times 70, what Jesus was saying to them, it's infinite. There is no limit. There is no number. There isn't like, okay, you've hit the line and now I don't have to anymore. For all of them. Including me. When you sit in that reality, it's difficult to grasp. Because we all, or maybe I should just pause and say, I know for me, I put a limit on people. And usually that limit is tied to how big the hurt is, how significant the wrong is. Don't we? I know for me, again, I'll just speak for me. I have a sliding scale. Man, if you just kind of have a bad day and you kind of say something that's kind of edgy and mean, right, okay, I'll let that go. You attack my wife? That scale slides red line right away. You walk into my house and you steal a pencil. Okay, maybe you needed a pencil. But if you walked in my house and stole my dog, Lola, right? Sliding scale, there's a vast difference between stealing a pencil and my dog. If you're like me, and maybe you are, we put that sliding scale all the time. And we want to know how much. And Jesus is like, you got to know. The number was infinite. And then Jesus starts to tell a story. Now, Jesus was a master at this. This was a very common technique for the rabbis, the Jewish religious leaders. They would teach spiritual truths by telling what was called parables. They were fictitious stories with a, essential, timeless truth to them. And Jesus was a master story, parable teller. And so he starts to tell this story. He goes, therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. Now, the word servants, a better way to understand that word servants were just his high officials. These were men who worked and served the king, who were over different aspects of the king's kingdom, over aspects of his business ventures. And so they were working for the king. And the king wants to make sure that he settles all of their accounts of what they owed him. And so he calls in his servants, his high officials. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Now that number is a massive number. And there's a couple insights that we have to understand when Jesus was telling the story of what that line 10,000 bags of gold truly represented. You see, another word is talent, and it was a form of a wage in the Roman economy system. And so Jesus is kind of pulling that in because they would understand that. But then he uses the number 10,000. And in the Greek language, 10,000 was the largest number that they had. They didn't have another number that represented anything bigger than 10,000. And so this number, what Jesus was trying to teach, which Jesus was trying to convey, was a number so big that no one could get their arms around it. I sat down at my desk and I was thinking through this, like, what in our modern day, what's that number that's so big that there's no bigger number, or it represents a number so big that there's nothing bigger. And it's not infinity, because infinity is not a number, right? It's infinite. But what's the biggest number? And this is the biggest number worldwide. It's 10 Google. That's the biggest number. It's a 1 with 100 zeros behind it. That's the biggest number. And that's what Jesus would say some 2,000 years ago. If he was in our modern day culture, he would say 10 Google. Like, it's the biggest number I can even come up with, because it's the biggest number around. So all the people listening to Jesus and Peter and the disciples, they'd be like, okay, that's a massive number. So a guy who owed him 10,000 bags of gold, or 10 Google, was brought to him. And we're told that since he was not able to pay, why? Because that number was so big. He didn't have enough minutes in a day for the rest of his life to earn that amount of money to pay it back. We're told that the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. And in fact, again, it would barely even touch the debt that he owed. And at this exact moment, the servant fell on his knees before him. He says, "Be patient with me," he begged. "Be patient. I just need more time." But here's the thing. The servant knew when he said, "Be patient," he didn't have enough time. There wasn't enough time in one lifetime or 2 lifetimes or 10 lifetimes to earn that type of money. And the king knew. Didn't matter about his patience. There's no amount of patience he could hand that servant to give him enough time for him to earn that type of money to pay him back, right? Patience, that wasn't going to solve anything. He said, "Be patient with me," he begged, "and I'll pay back everything." The servant knew he couldn't. Again, the number's too big. The king knew he couldn't. The number was too big. The servant's master took pity on him and canceled the debt. Now, the word debt, Jesus is going to do something interesting as he's teaching this parable. He will use one word that gets translated into our English language as debt here, and then he'll use a different word that still gets translated into debt. But this debt, this word, it's more like he goes, I wiped out a bad loan. that the king just looked at this debt as a loan. And it was just a bad loan. And he forgave the loan. And he let him go. He let him go. And Jesus went on with the story. He goes, but when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants, another high official. They were co-workers. Think about it that way. And he found one of his fellow servants, one of his co-workers, who owed him 100 silver coins. 100 silver coins. Now, how much is that? Well, basically it equates to 100 days of wages. So I sat down, I grabbed my calculator, and simple math, right? I just said, well, if you get paid $15 an hour, work an 8-hour day, 100 days, how much would that be? Just in modern day dollars. And what I came up with is that number was, well, $12,000. Just modern day wages. Now, maybe you make more than $15 an hour. Maybe you make less than $15 an hour. But, $12,000, it's not a small sum. No matter how much you make an hour, $12,000, I would take it if someone walked up to you and said, here's $12,000. I'm pretty sure you're not going to say no, thank you. Right? If someone walked up to you and handed you a penny, maybe you'd say no, thank you. But $12,000, right, we would all say yes. So it equated to 100 days of wages, right? But think about what the first servant owed the king. He owed him this number. Just pause there for a moment. The king had just forgiven him that. It's a 1 with 100 zeros. This is a dollar amount that no one can fathom. He was forgiven this, but he goes finds a fellow coworker who owes him that. He says, you got to pay me now. And Jesus goes on, he grabbed him and began to choke him. He physically attacks him. He just didn't verbally say things. He is giving him a beat down. And he screams at him. He goes, pay back what you owe me. Pay it back now. I want my money. His fellow servant, his coworker, fell to his knees and begged him. And listen to what he says. It's the same thing that the other servant had just said to the king. Just be patient with me. I will pay it back. But he refused. The king just forgave him his massive debt that he could never repay. But now he refuses to give his fellow coworker, his fellow servant time to repay back a debt that he actually could repay. He refused, we're told. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. And when the other servants saw what happened. Now, we got to pause there. Because this is one of those parts of the story that would be so easy to just overlook and not catch. And if you're a Christ follower, you got to lean into this. You can't miss this. You see, we have to understand that other people are watching. Jesus said that people will grasp his love by how we love each other. Jesus said that how we commit to unity amongst each other, the church, a gathering of Christ followers, how we embody unity will draw other people to Jesus. You see, what Jesus understood, and he taught all the time, say, hey, Christ followers, no, the world is watching. The world is looking. The world is paying attention to how you treat people, and it matters. Hey, church, people are watching how you treat each other within the church, how you treat each other in the community. People are watching, and it's either going to draw them towards Jesus or it's going to repel them from Jesus. The significance of this, we can't overlook. The significance of this, we can't let go. The significance of this. And Jesus, in this parable, in this fictitious story, says, hey, when other people saw what happened, they took notice. They were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. And then the master called the servant in, and he goes, you wicked servant, I canceled all. And the emphasis is on all. I canceled all your debt, not some of it. I didn't just wipe out some of the zeros. I didn't just take off a percentage. No. I canceled all the debt, a debt that you could never repay, a debt that was so large you can't even get your arms around. But I canceled all of it. You didn't have to pay anything because you begged me to. And shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? And why didn't you extend mercy to your fellow servant, your co-worker, just like I extended mercy to you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. You see, this was a life sentence. There's no way he could pay it back. There's no way. There's no way he could pay back this amount. And then Jesus comes out of this story and looking at everyone. And I think Jesus made eye contact with every single person. Because, and this is how my Heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Not just lip service. Not just saying I forgive because you have to. But the core of your being, at your soul level, forgive. You see, forgiveness is me giving up my right to hurt you, hurting me. It's giving up my right. Another way to say it this way is forgiveness is me canceling your debt. No matter how big or how small that debt is. And I get it. There's some people connected into your life, and they've racked up a debt so massive, so big. And what they've done, I mean, the gravity of what they've done to you or people around you. And I don't want to minimize the size of debt because I get it. There's some people that have hurt you that deeply, and that debt is that massive. But forgiveness says, I'm choosing to cancel your debt because, and the because is everything, because I know the debt God has canceled for me. Don't miss this, because it is the essence of the story. It is the lesson of the story that Jesus told. See, the king represents God. And he has forgiven us a debt. When you place your faith, your trust in Jesus, his grace surrounds us. It cancels our debt. But yet we have a way of going to other people and saying, but you owe me. See, one of the challenges in this series, we looked at this in part 1 on the spectrum. You know, either you find yourself as a push-arounder, you let people walk around all over you, you don't have boundaries, you let people take advantage of you, or you are a push-awayer. You just keep everyone at arm's length. You're closed off. And the goal is, how do we walk with each other? And we have to come in from the extremes to actually walk with. Part one, and this has to be the beginning part. We looked at what John, another disciple, wrote in 1 John chapter 3 and 1 John chapter 4. That love. We have to start with understanding, grasping God's love for us. So many times we think about how we love God, and you should do that. But the beginning place is grasping God's love for us. It's everything. How deeply God loves you. How deeply God loves me. And as you grasp God's love, we have to grasp his forgiveness. The debt that we owe God, but God's grace through Jesus on the cross wipes out the debt. Wipes out the debt. And in the same breath, and I get this, when you think about God's love and his call for us to love everyone, when you think about God's forgiveness in your life, and he's like, no, you have to forgive others. This word "but" comes creeping in, doesn't it? It sounds like, I get I'm supposed to forgive, but I know Jesus died for my sins. But Chris, if you know my story, if you know what that person has done to me, I just don't know how. So in part 3, we're going to get really, really practical. And what does forgiveness really look like? I mean, we're going to look at things like, well, yeah, you can forgive, but there's still consequences to actions. And so many times people think that forgiveness means there's no more consequences. In part 3, we're going to look at, well, no, there's still boundaries. You can forgive someone, but still create boundaries that people have to agree to, or if they don't, then you can't walk with them. Forgiveness still means that you should protect yourself, your emotional, mental health, and those connected with you. So many times we think we forgive and that the consequences, the boundaries, it just goes out the window. Well, I guess I have to forgive. No. And Jesus actually will hit on this. Jesus teaches on this, and Jesus models this. And that's why we have to understand forgiveness. It means I cancel your debt, whether you want me to or don't. I cancel your debt, no matter how big it is. I'm going to choose to forgive. But for us to truly be able to choose to forgive those who have hurt us the most, we have to start with what God has done for us. You see, have you grasped the gravity of your sin and the grace God has extended to you? Have you grasped your sin, the debt load, and the grace through the cross that God has wrapped around you? As you understand God's forgiveness for you, as you receive that forgiveness, it's going to help you. It's going to stretch you to extend that forgiveness to others. Let's pray. Lord, I just ask that not only will we truly, truly grasp the debt that we've racked up, our sin, but in the same breath, know that your grace through the cross, through Jesus, has covered it. So, Lord, as we just make our way through this week, I just pray that you'll help us understand. Because the more we understand your love for us, the more we understand your forgiveness in our lives, help us. Give the capacity to extend that love and forgiveness to others. In your name I pray.